Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to the Augmented Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Blue Leaf. On this episode, John Prendergast and I are thrilled to welcome Laura Gregg back to the show. Laura is the Senior Vice President and Director of Practice Management and Advisor Research at FlexShares ETFs, and she is making her grand return to the Augmented Advisor Podcast to help us gain a deeper understanding of the trends shaping the future of your business as a independent financial advisor or RIA. She and her team at FlexShares recently released a study titled The Race to Scalability 2022, Current Insights from 12 Years of Advisor Research on Investment Management Trends. Now, the study revealed some fascinating things about how financial advisors and wealth management firms are leveraging outsourcing as a mechanism to become more efficient and scalable. And toward the end of the episode, we dive into some details of the current proposed rule change by the SEC that would increase the required due diligence that RIAs would need to perform on the outsourced solutions used in their business. And as you'll hear John relate, this has the potential to have a big impact on your business, so it's definitely worth learning more about. Okay, with that stage set, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a topic or a guest for the show, please feel free to hit us up. Shoot us an email, podcast@blueleaf.com, or hit us up on the socials. Blue Leaf, John, myself, we're all active on LinkedIn and Twitter, and we're super easy to find. Okay, let's get to our conversation with Laura Gregg. Well, Laura Gregg, welcome back to the Augmented Advisor Podcast. We're so happy to see you again.
Oh, I am delighted to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me back.
It was such a fun conversation last time, so we got to do it again.
That's right.
All right, the pressure's on.
Well, it was funny. I was talking about this earlier today about how much I really welcome these types of conversations when somebody has some rich data on our market segment, right? On financial advisors, their behaviors, their preferences, what they're actually doing in their business. I learned a lot about it, but I think this is one of those topics that's incredibly powerful for our audience members as well to learn from. So I'm thrilled that you're here. So let's just jump right into it. The title of your newest study is The Race to Scalability 2022, Current Insights from 12 Years of Advisor Research on Investment Management Trends. So as
Take
the
a
title,
breath now, Mike. That's a long title.
In fairness, it's 2 lines on the report.
It's 2 lines.
So
Right. I like to bring the whole thing. Exactly. I'm working on my reads, right? So anyway, as the title states, you and the FlexShares team have been tracking trends for a decade plus now, right? Which, 12 years more than a decade. No dare, Mike. Anyways, one of the things that I thought would be fun to kick off with is, why is scalability the core focus of your annual study? Or perhaps maybe scalability has risen to the top over the course of those 12 years. But obviously, it's something that you and your team believe is incredibly important. So let's talk about that first. Like, why is scalability so important?
So, John, we have something in common. I was starting this research when you were starting Blue Leaf. And this research and the scalability aspect of it really came out of the 28 downturn. We were, I was supporting a team of advisors that were selling investment products to RIAs. And all of a sudden, some of our clients, our long-term clients, were having really difficult conversations with their clients and decided that maybe they didn't want to be in the investment management business anymore. So they started outsourcing their investment management to turnkey asset managers, to other outsourcing solution providers. So we really wanted to figure out, is this a long-term trend? What does it mean for our business, quite frankly? And so that's kind of how the survey started. In the early years, we fielded this 7 times every other year. In the early years, the title was Investment Management Outsourcing Research. Beyond that just being really boring as a title, we as we got into this research, we not only wanted to understand why advisors were outsourcing or not outsourcing the investment functions, but what else were they outsourcing? And so really, it all comes down to time management, right? You need time to be able to scale. And for some advisors, they were using the time to grow their business, to do prospecting and business development. For others, they were at a good number of clients. They just wanted to retain those clients and grow assets with their existing clients. So they were spending time on deepening relationships. But to do that, they needed to outsource something. And so that's kind of how this started, and it's just continued over time.
And that's clearly continued to be a big driver, right? I mean, this use of time in terms of outsourcing investment management in particular. And, I'm curious, when you think about that, how much time can an advisor expect to free up, and beyond that, what are some of the things that an advisor, really can do? You mentioned a couple of them. I'm curious to hear, what are the top 3 things that folks are doing with that time?
John, that's a great question. In our survey, we ask advisors to estimate about how many hours they're working on individual investment functions, whether that's portfolio manager research, portfolio rebalancing, construction, whatever it might be, monitoring. And what we found is the median number of hours per week that they're spending is about 22 hours. Now, they're also spending a lot of time on client meetings, about 17 hours. So add that up, it's about a 40-hour work week. And, forget all the other stuff that they're also doing. So there's a lot of time. And the things I mentioned before, some advisors that are seriously in the growth mode are using the extra time that they now have to do that prospecting and to bring more clients in, others to build those relationships. And a lot of people, a lot of advisors from now versus 12 years ago are really doing a lot of planning and advice. And that takes a lot of time. And so they're using this extra time to spend with clients to help, develop their long-term plans.
So grow the business and deepen client service. I think those are really good uses of time.
Yeah.
And I should say, and then there's a part of the universe that's just taking their time back, They may be in the twilight of their career, they've got a great lifestyle practice, and, they're done with the 60, 70-hour weeks and just want to kind of scale back.
You just hit on something a moment ago that I think is worth kind of exploring a little bit deeper when it comes to scalability, the concept of scalability, right? So you mentioned that, and I may be butchering the hours, but you said they're spending about 22 hours on investment management related stuff, like kind of like the operational component of their job, and about 17 hours, so less than half of their time on client facing, like actually interacting with their client. And so it kind of begs the question to go into what is scalability? Scalability is the stuff that, for every one client, I have to do this, right? It's variable in lockstep with the service of the client versus, hey, I do this and there's no variable, right? It's like I do it once and I can do it for one client and I do it for 1,000 clients. Now, if the average advisor has 100 to maybe 150 clients at the upper end, how much time do they have to spend to serve each one of those clients, and how much availability do they have to serve new ones? That's a constraint, right? The scalability constraint. I wonder if over the course of the study or the years you've been doing this, if you surface kind of like the juxtaposition of what's the most time consuming and lowest scalability thing that an advisor does. What are the stuff that just doesn't scale that an advisor does in his or her business?
Yeah. So obviously that's investment management, right? So in order to scale investment management, if you're keeping it inside, it's adding headcount, and that's expensive headcount.
Right.
Other than that, it's a lot of the back office stuff, the stuff that Blue Leaf provides. Quite frankly, the reporting, the on-demand requests for how's my portfolio doing, the creating of decks if you will, to make them pretty for your client meetings, and the knowledge that you need inside with those Excel pros that can dump it into Power, all that stuff that it used to be the norm, but it no longer should be, I should say. But I'm always surprised because there are a lot of advisors running their practice on Excel and PowerPoint still. And, as somebody that, is terrible at both of those things, I don't know how you can do it. But, so those are two very important things, just the invoicing, the billing, the reporting. You might have a system, but what if that person leaves?
Yeah.
Then, their less automated way of doing it becomes more cumbersome to the person that follows in their wake. And we've had a lot of people leaving their jobs. I'd also say marketing.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you do it well. And I think a lot of, I might be a little bit biased because I'm a marketing person, but, a lot of people just think of, oh, it's nothing. It's, anybody can do marketing. But, to do it effectively, to have the social presence, to, have a website that's functional, that works, that really makes you stand out, you need somebody that's very accomplished that can do that for you.
It's interesting. Some of those things are very symptomatic and common in small businesses. And I always like to make the note that most advisory firms, RIAs, are small businesses. The average RIA has fewer than 5 advisors in it if you go look at the data. So we're talking really small companies, and usually in small companies, the CEO is chief cook and bottle washer, as they always say. Like, I do everything. I'm sweeping the floors and emptying the trash because this is, it's my shop. And so it takes kind of like expanding your vision to becoming a business owner mentality to start thinking about, hey, I can't be the only one who's doing this, or it can't just be me and my staff that's doing this. We have to find other ways to get more efficient and scalable with the activities in our business. Are you seeing that there's like an inflection point, I guess? Like when an advisory firm gets to a certain scale, is that when they size? Right?
Yeah.
That they start to thinking about the scalability of it?
Yeah, I think, for most of our research, we found that inflection point, and it varies, right? But it's usually around 100, 150 million, where they make the conscious decision, am I adding headcount or am I finding ways to outsource? And then it kind of grows with that. And then, as they grow to maybe get to that 1 billion mega RIA size, then, they've got more resources. They can bring stuff back in, and they do. And that's been the, kind of the beauty of watching all the outsourcing solutions over the past 12 years. In the beginning, it was kind of an all or nothing thing. Thank you, Northern Trust. I like your products, but I'm outsourcing everything. I'm not going to do a thing. And then, then after 2008, we had kind of a run, right? With good absolute returns for more than a decade. And people got a little bit more confident and said, well, I don't really need to outsource everything. I really like managing this or that. And they started bringing things back in-house. And, it was pretty hard to deliver a negative return. But now things have shifted again, and we did this latest survey right in the beginning of the pandemic, and we saw more people bringing stuff, or pushing stuff out again. And but the beauty is that the automation, the technology has allowed for so much flexibility, so it can really be customized to each advisor's business, what they need to deliver to their clients.
And are you seeing something similar?
Lines. Oh. Sorry, Mike.
No, it's okay. I was going to say, are you seeing like a similar inflection point, like at that 150 million AUM size of a firm, when advisors start to look to you to leverage the technology stuff, they start thinking about being more scalable?
Blue Leaf certainly sees that, although it starts a lot smaller for us, because no rational person's going to try and build their own software when they're just starting, right? That's just, it's not going to happen. So, I think outsourcing investment management, when it's for many advisors, and one of the points that Laura, your research shows, is that it's a core part of the value proposition. It's viewed as a differentiator, and so I think folks are a lot more reluctant to outsource something like that than a spreadsheet, right? You're not going to make your own spreadsheet. You'll use the tools that you're given and go from there. And so it's just a different decision. And likewise, I think what we don't typically see, although in some certain really huge cases, we don't typically see that rebound where it's outsourced and then it comes back in-house, except the very largest of firms. And even the very largest firms, for the most part, don't write their own software. Well, they write some pieces of it, but a lot of what they do is they'll license somebody else's and white label it, and sort of customize a little bit. Again, it's a specialty business to develop that kind of software, and it's not particularly differentiating for one firm versus another. The software itself, it's how you implement it, how you use it. Likewise with investing, I think what a lot of advisors who've gotten comfortable outsourcing have learned is that it's not that this investment manager has some particular thing that's totally differentiated and totally unique in the marketplace, because that doesn't really exist. What's unique is the way that you implement that investment manager's approach within the context of that household, that portfolio, and that's where the differentiation starts to come. So that's what we've seen.
And one of the things that we have seen is as firms grow, where they might have outsourced all the investment management, so they take it in for a variety of reasons, take pieces of it back for a variety of reasons. Sometimes just they love that function. They love to manage equities or alt or whatever it may be. But also as they grow, they might take in the portfolio management of their largest tier clients and then leave all the small accounts to the third party to manage, so that they can really design that custom portfolio that you were talking about, John, and deliver, something that has their fingerprints on it while still maintaining great, portfolio management for their smaller accounts.
Well, one of the things that your report actually points out is that same rationale for doing something differentiated can both drive, insourcing, but it can also drive outsourcing. Take the example that your report shows about ESG and other specialized investing trends, where I might not have in-house expertise on that, not really be able to develop it even as a large shop, because it is a special, special field. That seems to potentially be a real driver. We had a couple of guests, Nick Cantrell from Green Future Wealth Management and Jamie Katz of Humankind Investments, talking about this. And, it's not just for Gen Z and hippies these days, but I'm kind of interested because, you get this scalability study and one thinks, well, how did ESG come up in a scalability study? How did you get there?
Yeah, well, so kind of two ways. One is, we ask the advisors in our survey, what is it that you're looking to outsource? So alt has always been, one of those things that, some advisors don't think they have that expertise. They'd rather push that off. But ESG over the past couple surveys has been popping up. In addition to that, we did some qualitative interviews this time around, and ESG came up a number of times there as well, where, many advisors just don't feel equipped. It's this big, they often still think of it as SRI from the 1990s when it's exclusionary, and why would I want to deliver this? It's always going to have lower returns. And now this, admittedly, this was a tough year for ESG, but, this was a great year for energy stocks. So, not every investment is up all the time or down all the time. But we at FlexShares launched a suite of core ESG funds last year. And one of the things that we realized is the education that advisors really need. And so we put together kind of an educational ESG hub to hopefully explain what ESG is and what it is not. And what we believe it is, first and foremost, is an investment. It's an investment that relies upon data that provides insights into potential risks, whether that's environmental risks, social risks, HR issues, anything that could provide, lead to litigation and upset the share price of a security. And I think so often it's painted with, if you invest in an ESG fund, you're going to lose money, and you're just like, as you said, a hippie or a tree hugger. And that just isn't the case. Now, there are impact funds that maybe are a little bit more like that, and there's exclusionary funds that just sustainable investments come in so many shapes and sizes. But ESG really, it's an investment first. And we've done, separate from this, we've done some other surveys on it, and some of the stats that we have from those high net worth investors we spoke to is that 72% of the people we talked to were either somewhat interested, or very interested. Only 13% of their advisors have ever brought it up, and then there's 57% who maybe aren't interested in it now, but they said they would give it a second look if their advisor mentioned it. So I don't know. When I talk to advisors, I think it's an opportunity cost not to understand what your clients are thinking about. So on our, I'm sure you'll include in the link on our little educational site, we have you can download a questionnaire to give your clients to see, one, are they interested? Two, do they understand it? And there's been a lot of bad press this year, that I think has scared some people. But
it's really interesting, to lend credence to why it belongs in this, scalability study. Our guests, as we were talking about Nick Cantrell and James Katz there, one of the things they were pointing out was most advisors aren't equipped to even do the research on this type of stuff, right? So that there are dedicated solutions out there that are helping to do the research, so you can plug in your whatever stocks and do searches, right? Certain searches for companies that are being sustainable and environmentally friendly and have good governance and whatever. So it's one of those things where if you're going to do this, you're going to have to find ways to make it scalable, because you kill yourself trying to do all the research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Switching gears a little bit, because this has really intrigued me, and with this being we're talking about an augmented advisor podcast, where we spend a lot of time thinking about technology and how advisors are using technology to leverage their abilities and to be more scalable. You have a section in the report titled "The Slow Rise of Wealth Tech Platforms," in which you highlight the usage of digital advice platforms, aka robo-advisors, more broadly, but there's some other delineations in there. One thing that jumped out to me was a downward trend, believe it or not, from 2020 to 2022 in the desire for new technology and automation as reasons to adopt wealth tech platforms. It dropped from 53% to 40%. Why such a big drop? And is this the specific drop to robo-advisor solutions, or is it a technology desire as a whole? What were you seeing there?
So, with every survey, we ask a question and we don't ask a follow-up that we should have, know. So next time we'll ask that follow-up. So this is just my conjecture, but I think it's a bit of a reversion to the mean. In 2018, when we asked that question, 36% said that they wanted, the wealth tech to help them with new technology. Then it went up to 53%, as you mentioned, and then fell back down to 40%. So I think it's, a bit of reversion. But I also think that, advisors, many of them during the pandemic, were forced into new technologies as we all went remote. So maybe, on the top of their mind it's not maybe new technology, because they got whatever they got, to function remotely if they did that. But so the top four reasons that that advisors told us that they were interested in wealth tech is, number one, to remain competitive in the wealth management space. Number two, to improve productivity. Number three, to attract new types of clients, probably younger. And then four was to bring new tech. And so I would suggest that technology really kind of underpins all of those things.
Yeah.
To be competitive. And so, maybe it's an adjustment in how we do the drop-down menu or what we provide. So, there's always a chance that the survey provider could, do things a little bit better the next time around. But I really think all of those rely upon new technology.
By the way, I love the fact that you were just honest about that, just saying, you know what, it could have been the question wasn't worded properly, or hey, we should have asked a follow-up question. That's why I love that, because it's kind of like, hey, you are a scientist, you're out there
That's
researching.
a real researcher right there.
Yeah, you're studying, and occasionally you're like, hey, this is interesting. Next time, I need to ask some other questions because I need to know a little bit more.
I know, because I get paired with really tough podcast hosts.
Listen, man, I'm diving in deep here. Anyway, so listen, one thing that really popped up was there's an important distinction to be made, and I think it's really worth noting here, is that advisors advisors that are leveraging technology to enhance their ability to deliver financial advice to their clients is different from leaning on technology to render the advice itself, right? And so very often when an advisor hears robo-advisory or wealth tech platform, I think they're hearing this is going to do it for me versus I'm going to use this to, again, become more scalable. For me before, when I had to do everything manually. So as you look across the landscape, where do you see advisors leveraging other technologies most in their pursuit of scalability?
Well, I think, obviously the, investment management when they get to that point, but not all advisors outsource that.
Yeah.
They grow organically. I've been, I'm a marketing person, so I've been heartened to see some marketing automation, right? The make an appointment with me on the homepage of the website, social posts that are pushed out regularly, but also, all the stuff that Blue Leaf does, right? The reporting and the invoicing and the billing. We are seeing more of that, and those are things that we haven't dove deeply into. It's just, what do you outsource? And all of those things, are listed there.
I like that. Baby, what's a suggestion for next year's thing? Like, what else are you doing? I want to get some more detail on this tech stuff.
Laura, we want you to research everything under the sun. That's what we want.
We're looking for...
And the folks I work with are like, you have 47 questions, Laura. You got to cut something. So, it's that fine line.
Yeah, that's great.
So
that's awesome.
We've talked a lot about all of the amazing benefits really you get by outsourcing. And I can tell you personally, growing Blue Leaf, outsourcing is a key component. You just can't do everything, and you shouldn't do everything because you're not going to do it well. There's all these benefits, and this is great, and there's a cloud on the horizon with this new SEC proposed outsourcing rule. And I mean, that could make it much more difficult. So I figure we should talk a little bit, and I'm going to explain the sort of high level to our listeners, and then I want to get your take on a few things, Laura. So for those of you who don't know, at a high level, this all sounds really reasonable. The SEC is proposing in the Federal Register, where they have to put this out for comment, which closes December 27th, I believe,
something
for comment. So they want advisors to meet minimum requirements for outsourcing. So you've got to conduct due diligence prior to engaging a service. And that includes providing a rationale for why you're going to outsource that function at all. So explain why you're going to outsource your investment management. For instance, require advisors to periodically monitor the service and reassess and basically run through the entire exercise on a regular basis. They want advisors to collect census information on vendors. And then they want to amend the books and records part of the Advisor Act to incorporate all of this. I mean, it sounds like a lot of work, but it sounds like it could be reasonable and for the benefit of clients, I think, until you get into which vendors actually need to have diligence performed on them. And that's a concept called covered function. We'll talk about that in a bit. But Laura, let me stop before I keep quoting the Federal Register, and get your initial take on the proposed rule and what impact you think it could have as written, as you've read it.
So I'm not a compliance officer, but
none of us on this podcast are. Do not take compliance advice from us.
That's yes, right. But our compliance teams will review this. I guess my first thought, and in talking to some of the turnkey asset managers that we work with, we have to remember that RIAs are fiduciaries. They must always have the best interests of their clients in mind. And so I don't do this, so it's easy for me to say, but you should be doing due diligence before you hire a provider as the fiduciary, and just as course of being a good business person. You should conduct that due diligence, and providers of these services should make that as efficient as it's possible for you to do that. I think, the way I read the proposed rules was they were worried about a set it and forget it mentality. So maybe you do the due diligence and then you're working with the same provider for years and years and you don't revisit it. And, things change, staff changes, functionality changes. And so I think, there absolutely will be more work, but I don't know that it's bad work. Because you should always be in a position where you can explain to your client how their money is being managed, how the risk is being managed, and that you as part of the fee that you're getting, whether that's 1% or more, whatever it is, from them, that you're doing something to earn that fee. And the doing something is just ensuring that the wheels are still on the bus, that it's functioning as it should be, and that you can get information from those providers should you need it. But you're on the other side, so you probably have a little bit of a different view than me and my very simplistic view of let's, kumbaya and all that.
Well, I think it does all matter where your perspective lies. And as I was analyzing the language, because, well, I'm like that. I'm analytical, not a compliance officer, but I can read. I think that is reasonable for a certain class of service providers. Where this seems to get hairy is in how the government's defining this covered function idea, basically who you have to do your diligence on, and where that leads. So, I'll give you, for instance, and I'm not going to quote verbatim again from the Federal Register, but basically a covered function has to meet two criteria. So one, it's necessary for the advisor to provide its investment advisory services in compliance with federal securities law. That's so if it is a service that meets that criteria, then that's one of the two criteria it's got to meet. And that the second one is, if not performed or performed negligently, would be reasonably likely to cause a material negative impact on the advisor's clients or on the advisor's ability to provide investment advisory services. Again, sounds almost reasonable until you get into some of their examples. And I'm gonna get your hot take on these, Laura. I'm gonna give you some of their examples. And this I'm actually gonna read verbatim because I want to get it right.
That's good.
So one, for example, if an advisor engages a broker-dealer to provide an electronic trading platform to submit orders from the advisor and allocate trades among the advisor's clients' accounts after the trades have been executed, then the advisor's engagement of the broker-dealer for those services would not be accepted from the proposed rule. In other words, it's a covered function. So this rule require a rep for a BD to essentially supervise their own BD or custodian. What do you think of that?
I don't know. Honestly, guys, I don't think that this is an area that I should be commenting on from a compliance standpoint.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
and we'll cut it out. So okay. I'm going to comment though.
Yeah, great.
Because from my perspective and my reading of this, it's nuts. So I'll give you another example. So again, reading from the Federal Register, for example, if an advisor used a service provider for portfolio management functions that experienced a cyber incident that caused an inability for the advisor to monitor risks in a client portfolio properly, it would be reasonably likely to cause material negative impact on the advisor's clients and its ability to provide investment advisory services, end quote. Therefore, it's a covered function. The problem here, I think, Laura, is this one's really sneaky in its scope. So what's a cyber incident? So the internet goes down because that happens. So in theory, that's a cyber incident. So the advisor's kind of liable to have done diligence on whether the internet should go down. It seems very, 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 very slippery slope. Another example. So portfolio management, loosely defined. Most advisors we run into of the smaller variety do this in a spreadsheet, often an online spreadsheet. So if they can't access that spreadsheet, that functions down. So do I now have to diligence Google Sheets? Do I have to diligence the internet itself? I think, and this is my soapbox, so I'm going to take it, I'm going to stand on it, and I'm going to shout. I think this is insane. I think the way that this is done takes the way that the industry works today, which is most advisors, because they are small businesses like you and Mike were talking about, get a lot of their diligence benefit from the custodian or BD that they work with. Those large firms do an incredible amount of diligence. This flips that on its head and makes it all the responsibility of the individual advisor. And that seems like where there aren't the resources to do it and do it well. I mean, I just answered a 400 question recertification with Fidelity as part of our work with them among our many partners. It's pretty exhaustive. I'm pretty sure no individual advisor could possibly put me through that or reasonably be expected to interpret it. So I think the SEC's got a lot of work here. They're great people at the SEC, but this one's upside down, and they're going to need to figure out how to get the end result that they want accomplished without burdening, frankly, entities that have no ability to do this. It's just not possible, right?
So I'm wondering, and I don't know, it's just my question. Does just a lot more fall on the clearing firms that, the advisors are using for their trades, and, will it result in the, like the Fidelities and the Schwabs or whatever, managing some of that on behalf of their advisor clearing clients?
Well, and that's actually the way it works more or less today, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a reporting, platform and you want data from Charles Schwab or Fidelity or Pershing or any one of the other major custodians, you've got to go through a pretty extensive diligence process to do so, which covers most of the issues that you'd imagine that the SEC would be concerned about. And so that's already being taken care of. So the additional responsibility directly on the shoulders of the individual advisor is both redundant and, in some sense, goofy, because they don't have the capacity to make that judgment. They just don't, especially from a technical perspective. Now, investment management services, that's their business, and sure, you then go, okay, maybe it's reasonable that they really do the advice, and if they're going to outsource that investment management and that's their business, they should reasonably be an expert, sure. But we're talking about, technical understanding, understanding of security protocols, et cetera. So either this is going to spring up a whole third-party industry of compliance firms, which gets us no further than we already are, or they're going to have to rewrite it and let the the folks who are already doing all of this work, let these individual advisors benefit from it.
Playing devil's advocate here, we've been seeing a bit of a trend. We actually had a guest earlier on one of our shows talking about having a virtual advisory firm, right? Where there is this trend where some advisors are starting to go, hey, look, I might just be able to be the relationship manager and functionally do almost none of the actual business stuff that is managing clients' assets. And basically I can outsource financial planning. I can outsource, investment management. I can up just almost every single thing other than me talking to the client. I wonder if the SEC is starting to go, hey, we have to make sure that advisors are well aware that you can't just go, if something breaks, it's not my problem because I'm not the one doing it. It's this other firm doing it. So you have to be aware and do some level of due diligence. I think you're right, though. Just as we've seen with other things like social media usage, SEC and other regulators were like, hey, this is what we think the rules are. And the firms came out and said, it's just way too onerous to do that. I can't monitor every single tweet that all of my financial advisors post. It's an impossibility, and it's a functional impracticality, overly burdensome on human beings. And then they kind of level set it a little bit. But I can kind of see where the mindset is going, right?
I think their intentions are right on. I think the intentions are spot on. And I think what you're describing, Mike, is one of the things that is driving that, right? But there's got to be sort of a sensible approach that's frankly possible.
Sure.
So, in other words, is it reasonable for an advisor to say, who's going to buy a CRM system that they're going to use, for which, let's say, Fidelity, Schwab, TD have all already done diligence? Is it a reasonable part of the rule to say, well, if that's the case, then I can, and in other legal worlds, this is called material reliance on experts, right? Mm. So I can materially rely on the fact that my custodian has done all this research and has approved them as to provide data through, because they've got to protect themselves as well. So that feels like a reasonable compromise here, and that anything that doesn't go through that level of rigor, then okay, so you got to do something else. That would seem like a reasonable compromise. But I think just simply burdening individual advisors with all the responsibility to do diligence on things that they frankly can't possibly realistically understand or assess, that just seems like it's unreasonable, and actually would likely wind up creating a bit of chaos. It's a tough rule the way it's written.
Well, and it's out for comment, so I would assume that some of that is going to be scaled back.
I can't wait to read John's comment, by the way. It sounds good. He's fired up. This is fantastic stuff. I know we're kind of creeping up on the end of our time together here, but this is an interesting topic. I think you purposely teed this up in your email, Laura, to kind of get John fired up here.
Job done.
Well, that I know. It's so funny because Laura sent an email like, hey, John, it might be interested to get your perspective. So, by the way, this was Laura saying, hey, I can't wait to offer all my perspective on the SEC. So, compliance team at FlexShares. This was not Laura. None of this.
This is my perspective, people.
That's right. She was very clear to say, I'm not comfortable weighing in too heavily on this. But I guess the interesting question to ask you is, has your team been receiving inbound questions from advisors looking for some clarity or how they should think about this? Is this something that's been on the top of mind for your advisor community?
I've not received any comments. I've proactively talked to some asset managers that we worked with to get some of their insights, but no, it's just something that I know is in the background. It doesn't affect me directly, so I can be a little lighter about it than the people who are looking down a really onerous road. But and I hear your concerns, John, and I would hope that after the comments are closed that we see some changes. But I do think at the core of it, it is good. And, advisors are collecting fees from their clients to ensure that the investments are being managed appropriately. And so to set it and forget it is a risk. But as it goes on and on, then there's diminishing returns, right?
Yeah, look, no one, including all the RIAs who have to live under the fiduciary standard, would say that they should be able to abdicate their fiduciary responsibility. It's why they're doing what they're doing. I think you have to have reasonable requirements that are expecting them to do reasonable things that they are reasonably capable of doing, and you have to think systemically. And generally the SEC eventually gets it right, generally. So I think as they look at the system that they're in, I think there are lots of ways to accomplish this without severe burden on the individual advisor and the individual advisory firm. If they are smart, then they can accomplish their goal without doing that.
Smart. Okay, last fun question for you here, Laura, and it just popped into my head. It's the blank check question. So you are frequently surveying and questioning financial advisors of every flavor, RIAs and independent broker-dealers and so forth. If you had a blank check, what research questions would you like answered? Like, what would you like to know? And it can be related to the scalability. It can be related to outsourcing or whatever. Like, what would be the one piece of information you're like, hey, that would be a total pain in the butt to get and take a long time, but hey, money's no object here. What's your blank check question?
Oh, gosh, there are so many. Well, as you know, we've been doing a lot of research this past year on how to grow wallet share with existing clients. And that has been, it's going to continue to be a focus for us. And I guess, what I like to, I'm so steeped in delivering an exceptional client experience. And I so often think that client service gets confused with client experience. I would love to understand all the above and beyonds that advisory teams are doing for their clients to build that relationship, how much time the above and beyonds take, and how committed they are to that, and what the true payoff is for that. That would be my,
I love it. Are you doing dog walking for your clients, and is that working? That type of stuff.
Yeah, like during COVID, I was talking to folks I talked to some folks and they would just, send an email with a market update, and others were showing up at their clients' homes, especially their older clients, with home cooked meals. I mean, like two opposite ends of the spectrum. Some were calling their clients, others were emailing. It just, I really would love to understand how much comes from those above and beyond experiences.
Love it. That's actually a really good one. I love that. Well, Laura, this has been fantastic. We're going to go ahead and get your sustainability study linked up in the show notes, as with your contact information, both personally and the FlexShares. We won't put your personal phone number up there, but everything else, just that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to plug before we let you go? Anything else you want to promote?
Well, of course, I want to promote my podcast. The FlexShares podcast, The Flexible Advisor. I think we're neck and neck, Mike, on some episodes. We've got about 87 published, and we cover all kinds of topics. And John, just prior to coming on air, has agreed to be a guest in 2023. So we're excited to have him. I'm sure our compliance folks will be excited as well.
Keep them busy.
The opinions will be my own and not that of FlexShares.
Full employment of compliance officers is John's goal.
I'm just kidding. So the Flexible Advisor, if you'd like insights on our how to grow wallet share with existing clients as well. And I just love talking with advisors. Every time I talk to one, I learn something new that's additive for me. So feel free to reach out.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Laura. Appreciate you having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to and/or watching this episode of the Augmented Advisor Podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. Huge thanks to Laura Gregg and the FlexShares ETFs team for sharing their amazing research with us. And sorry about the new assignments that we served up to you on this episode. You know we couldn't resist asking a few follow-up questions. So hey, next year, more of these questions answered. We'll have you back on the podcast, Laura. This will be amazing stuff. Okay, as I mentioned at the top of the show, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and do us a favor. Make sure you give the Blue Leaf page a follow on LinkedIn. We share every episode of the show on LinkedIn, and we would love to have you be part of our community. And by the way, if you like this episode of the show, click that share button, right? Share it with your community of people on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Chances are, if you liked it, they will too. Okay, that's it for today. Please make sure you're staying safe and be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Augmented Advisor Podcast. See ya. Bye.